You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
It is Friday, June 14th.
I'm so tired.
You're so tired. Have a busy week, didn't you?
It's been a week full of adrenaline for multiple reasons.
Let's see. Was there a hockey game this week?
There were two hockey games this week.
And
it's convention season, so just preparing a little bit for
multiple conventions.
It's fine.
Yeah, no one in.
We'll just all sleep in August. It's great.
That's right. You know what? I'm excited though about the various conventions because the conventions and the gatherings, we get to reconnect with a lot of people, a lot of our listeners, a lot of our guests as well. So excited about the opportunity. Mary will be at LWML convention next week. And then
next week already?
Yes. Yeah, in Mobile. And then we're headed to National Youth Gathering to do the Coffee Hour Live from the National Youth Gathering in early July or middle of July. And then later in July, Kip and Gary and Mary are headed to the LCMS convention. So stop by. If you're coming to any of those events, stop by and say hi.
And our swag is starting to come in too. So
yes, some cool KFUO swag. So
pretty excited about that.
Stop by. The coolest stuff is going to
Youth Gathering.
The Youth Gathering.
Of course.
Got to get some KFUO buttons at the Youth Gathering. There's cool stuff going to the other places as well.
T-shirts especially.
Yes. So come visit us at any of those places. We have two great things on deck today. An upcoming webinar that is outstanding, the non-casserole illness. What is that? We're going to talk about that in just a minute from our friends at Rural and Small Town Mission. And in the second half, we'll get an update from LCMS Disaster Response. There have just been floods, tornadoes, nonstop this season.
There's fires in California.
And now fires in California. So we're going to get an update from LCMS Disaster Response. And I saw what looked like a new disaster response trailer for being deployed to another congregation as well. Yes. So hopefully we can get the scoop on that as well. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting the Coffee Hour. Find out more about them at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon. I almost jumped my cue.
I paused too early. Joining us by phone this morning, Amy Gerdts, coordinator for LCMS Rural and Small Town Mission. Amy, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Great. Rural and Small Town Mission conducts webinars rather frequently with all kinds of great resources for rural and small town mission congregations, those ministries that are happening all over the country that are just connecting through webinars. And I saw this one coming up and really wanted to highlight it. Tell us how often do these webinars happen?
So actually we have a webinar every month. It's always on a Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. The Thursday changes a little bit based on the availability of our presenter. We always try to choose a presenter who can speak to topics that are applicable to rural and small town settings. So sometimes the presenters are somebody you may have heard of that is a expert that you've heard of out there. Sometimes they're going to be somebody who's just doing rural and small town ministry really well where they're at. And so they're not always big time names. Sometimes they are, but we try to find the people who are doing ministry well where it is applicable to our rural and small town congregations.
The presenter for the August webinar, is that correct? August 22nd, is that right?
Correct. We actually have a webinar in July coming up ahead of this one, but we're talking about the one that's coming up in August.
The Reverend Dr. Dennis Goff, he's Director of Ministry Programs at the Lutheran Foundation, and joining us this morning to talk about the non-casserole illness is the topic for the August webinar. Dr. Goff, thanks so much for being our guest this morning.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What is the non-casserole illness? Sorry to just steal the thunder here and give it all away. The non-casserole illness.
Well, I don't know where that term actually came up. I've seen it referenced so many different places, so many books that I've read, articles that I've read, in reference to mental illness. The typical thing is that, and the church is great at this, when somebody goes in the hospital for a surgery or when there's a death in the family, people in the congregation are great to bring a casserole, bring something to the home to feed the family while a loved one's in the hospital or as you're going through the grief process. But all too often, because stigma is so huge with mental illness and because people don't often feel comfortable talking about it. So often people are literally dealing with this in their families in silence. And nobody brings a casserole, nobody sends a card, nobody stops over and says, "How are you doing?" There's just not been the atmosphere created where we're as often open to talk about that. So somewhere along the way, somebody coined the phrase, mental illness is the no-casserole illness.
Mm-hmm. Why do we treat mental illness so differently, even in our churches?
I think there's just a huge lack of understanding. I think for a long time, whether it's intentional or unintentional, direct or indirect, the teaching, the implication in the church has been, if you're dealing with depression or anxiety or something like that, maybe your faith isn't strong enough. Mm. Well, we know that that's not the truth, that we don't know that's not the reality. A mental illness is a brain issue. It is a medical issue. It is a physical issue. So while there may be need for certain medications or other doctor care, therapy, counseling, a variety of things can help to address that. And it's not a matter of you just need to pray more. It's not a matter of your faith needs to be greater. Certainly, anything you and I deal with impacts our faith. If we have a physical diagnosis of cancer, it impacts my faith life. If I lose my job today, it impacts my faith life. Everything that happens in our life impacts our faith. But people dealing with mental illness is not because they have a lack of faith.
Can you paint a picture for us? Share a story of where you've seen this, the non-casserole illness, in a congregation or in a setting where that care was needed but often overlooked.
I'll tell you, the first story that comes to mind is that in the role that I have an opportunity to preach in a variety of different churches. And while I don't mention this all the time, there are times when I will talk about the work that the Lutheran Foundation is doing in terms of mental and behavioral health and wellness. I'll talk about, according to National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, 1 in 5 in our population are living with some kind of mental illness. I'll talk about how the fact that, that's not mentioned or talked about that much. What has been so surprising to me is when I quote that statistic, the number of people that will come out the door of the church, shake my hand, look me in the eye and say, "I'm 1 in 5. Thank you for mentioning that," because nobody ever talks about that in the church.
Yeah.
And that, I'd have to tell you, the first time that happened, and it's happened several times where I've preached, I was not expecting that. I was not prepared for that. It brought me to tears just by the fact that somebody said, "Thank you, you're talking to me."
Mm-hmm. How can we care more for our brothers and sisters? And on the flip side of that, how can we advocate for ourselves also if we are one of those 1 in 5? It's hard for people to care for you if they don't know that you're even struggling. So how can we advocate for ourselves, but also how can we reach out to people who we know are struggling?
I think in many ways it's a matter of creating a culture and a climate of acceptance and normalcy. And a lot of times when I talk about this in terms of what do we do in the church, I say I think one of the first things we can do is we normalize it by speaking about it, by using the language. And what I mean by that is when we pray on Sunday mornings, when a pastor prays, we can pray for people who have heart disease and cancer and surgeries, but we can also be praying for people who are living with depression and anxiety and bipolar and the other effects of mental illness. We don't necessarily have to mention their names, especially if somebody hasn't given us permission to do that. But we can mention those things because we know that there are people sitting there in our congregations. If the statistic is 1 in 5 in the population, I believe it's 1 in 5 in our congregations. So I think we normalize it by creating that culture. I think we have to speak about it. I think when you do make reference to this in a sermon or in a Bible study, it opens up a spirit of acceptance that this is an okay place for us to talk about this. And I think that that's one of the things that many people struggle with is this a safe place for me to mention this? Or am I going to be judged? So to do some things to create an environment where that happens. At my home church 3 weeks ago now, we invited NAMI to come, National Alliance of Mental Illness, our local chapter, because May was Mental Health Awareness Month. We invited them to come and do their FaithNet presentation. And the FaithNet presentation is designed for churches, and it's intended to just start the conversation a little bit. And we had 35 people that came, which I thought was a sizable response. And the conversations that I had with people after that, the number of people that came up to me and said, if we want to do some more things at the church about this, count me in, let me help, because I really struggled with this journey of depression. These are some people that, as I pass them in the hallway at church or see them on a Sunday morning, I would never guess that. But by the fact that we're talking about that in our church gave them a sense of openness and permission to say, I'm struggling with that. How can I help create an environment here for others? I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
With just, I know, we are always so short on time. I want to give Amy a chance to talk about the details here in just a minute, how to register and that sort of thing. But Dr. Goff, what is one thing you want participants in the webinar to walk away with?
I want them to realize that this is an opportunity for us to connect not only with people in our community, in our congregation, but people in our community. You mentioned at the start of the hour about the floods and the disaster that have happened around the country and the relief work that is taking place. One of the collateral things that's going to happen as a result of that is, this not only affects people's livelihood, it not only affects them, their businesses and their homes, but it's going to affect their mental wellness. Mm. And, there may be underlying issues for some people that are going to rise to the surface as a result of this. And I think for congregations to realize, there's an opportunity for us to connect with our community, not just our congregation, but our community by offering some training, some education, some resourcing, giving attention to this topic. And I think a lot of times congregations struggle with, well, what do I do? Well, we'll talk about some of the what do you do as we go through the webinar.
Amy, can you give us the details on how to get signed up for this webinar, when it's happening, all those good details?
Absolutely. We like to make this as easy as possible for people, so you don't actually have to pre-register. You can just join us at the time of the live webinar, which is August 22nd at 1 p.m. Central, by going to anymeeting.com/LCMS RSTM1, the numeral, or you can send me an email at rstm@lcms.org, and I will sign you up for our e-blast, and it will send you a link, and then you can just follow the link. I would also encourage you, Dr. Goff is going to join us at our RSTM National Conference this year and present on this topic a little bit more in depth. So if you want to have a chance to listen to him in person, as well as join in on lots of our other topics, to consider registering for that and joining us there. It's November 14th through the 16th this year, and we will be in Minneapolis. You mentioned it was a conference year. Lots of conferences. So you can find more information about our conference at lcms.org/RSTM as well.
Amy Gerdts, coordinator for LCMS Rural and Small Town Mission. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
The Reverend Dr. Dennis Goff, Director of Ministry Programs at the Lutheran Foundation, and the speaker for the upcoming August webinar for Rural and Small Town Mission. Thanks so much, Dr. Goff, for being our guest.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Coming up in just a little bit, we'll get some updates on all the disasters and LCMS disaster response. You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.